Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward bringing you another conversation this week with a Catholic author, and grateful for the opportunity because I love consecrated life. I actually wrote an article one time for Catholic Exchange of that same title, Why I Love Consecrated Religious, or something like that, and just essentially shared in that article about the witness that cloistered religious, that nuns, that sisters in the world, what basically how they've inspired me to live my own vocation, and how seeing them really is encouragement for me. And I think it's encouragement for the whole church as well. And today I'll be speaking with Mary Elizabeth Cuff, Dr. Cuff, and she has a new book from TAN called Mother to Mother, Spiritual and Practical Wisdom from the Cloister to the Home. So a little bit about our author and guest today. Dr. Cuff is a homeschooling mom, an independent scholar, and writer. She holds a PhD in American literature and classical rhetoric from the Catholic University of America, and is a proud alumna of both Catholic homeschooling and the University of Dallas. So very accomplished, and I'm sure she'll tell us that one of her biggest accomplishments, of course, being a mother, being a wife, and how all of this stuff from that she's done kind of influences the way that she lives out her vocation. So thanks so much, Dr. Cuff, for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Father.
Yeah, so quite an impressive bio there. You talk about American literature. I guess I'm just curious, what's one of your favorite American literature classics?
Moby Dick.
Okay, look at that. So, yeah, I remember I took an American literature class in college, and I don't think that it was probably the best class I ever took. I don't think it gave me a good introduction. I remember we read The Virginian by
Oh,
somebody named
wow.
Owen or something like
Yes,
that. So,
Owen Wister. I actually
yeah,
love that book, but I'm shocked that it showed up in a college classroom.
yeah. So it was a Benedictine monk that taught me that. So, anyways, well, great. Mother to Mother. This is a book available from Tan Books, and it's about mothers in cloisters. And I have a great affiliation and relationship with a lot of different cloistered monasteries, whether it's the Poor Clare Culletines down in Rockford, Illinois, or the Poor Clare Culletines in Roswell, New Mexico,
Mhm.
or the sisters down at Mother Angelica's shrine in Hanceville at the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament at that Poor Clare Monastery. I'll be there in November to give a talk as part of their Eucharistic presentations. So I love cloistered life. I have benefited, of course, from their prayers. In the diocese where I live in Green Bay, we have cloistered religious in the Denmark Carmelites, Discalced nuns there in Wisconsin here. So, and there's also some Cistercians that also are in Wisconsin in a different diocese. But how did you come to a fascination with religious life and the cloister, especially as a married woman?
Yeah, so actually, funny enough, two of those orders that you mentioned are in the book. I have five monasteries that I worked with on the book, and the Cistercians up there in Wisconsin were one of them, and the Roswell Poor Clares were another one. So that's cool that we have that connection. Um, why did I end up with a fascination with cloistered nuns as a mom? Well, I think cloistered nuns are just such amazing and kind of misunderstood members of the church. Um, I've always kind of been interested in them as part of the church because they're so visible and yet so hidden, right? So you never see a cloistered nun, and yet when you do go to where they are and you see them, they are such a sort of a physical sign of radical dedication to vocation. Um, More specifically for kind of what got this book going was I actually was at a playground. I talk about this in the introduction of my book. I was at a playground with my kids a couple years ago, and a Capuchin was there. Capuchin contemplative nun was there, and you never see a contemplative nun at a playground. So of course I had to go say hi. We were talking about, various things about, religious life, about life with, kids as a mom. And she happened to say, the contemplative nuns are the stay-at-home moms of the religious vocation. And that was sort of the spark that got the book going, because I thought, wow, I never thought of that before, but it's so true, right? Nuns, when they call each other, mother or sister, that's not just a cute term of endearment. Like, they actually mean it. So if contemplative nuns are the stay-at-home moms of the religious vocation, what else do we have in common? And that really kind of got me thinking about it, more than I'd really thought of contemplative nuns before. And the parallels just started shooting in, and I thought, well, I want to know, what else can I benefit from this comparison?
Yeah, as a Catholic priest, people call me father, and some people, they will often remark, they'll say, well, how can you, as an unmarried man, give advice to married couples? Or, how does that interact? You as a priest, how can you encourage people that in a life that you don't know? And so I'm willing to bet that might be someone who's hearing or someone who encounters this book, that might be their initial criticism. Well, how can a consecrated religious give advice to mothers when they're not a mother in the physical sense of having given birth, but yet they exercise that role of motherhood over an entire monastery? They have, in a sense, the other nuns who are their subordinates. They're kind of like their children in that moment. So, have you encountered that criticism? How would you respond to it?
Right. I think when I tell people what the book is about, there's sort of a pause at first where they're trying to sort of process, like, wait a minute, aren't nuns and moms the opposites? But I think I've had a lot of sort of positive, excited feedback actually from a lot of the moms that I've talked to, because when they, when they've had that moment to sort of say, wait, what is your book about? Then they start to kind of feel it themselves. I think it's because, you know, a lot of Catholic moms, they get it on like a deep level. Like, motherhood isn't simply physical, right? It has to be spiritual as well, especially, for a Christian mother in the vocation, right? That we've taken with vows, just like nuns have, right? Our vocation is started and guided by vows, permanent vows, right? The vows of married life. Um, the spiritual aspect of motherhood, I think a lot of moms kind of want advice, insight, and help when it comes to that angle, because the world doesn't focus on that at all. They focus on the purely physical aspects of motherhood, and they forget about that spiritual part. And nuns spend so much time reflecting on the spiritual aspect of motherhood. They are called to become mothers for the church and for the world, in a spiritual sense. They have many spiritual children. And so, maybe they don't have all the most experience when it comes to, the practical, physical aspects of some elements of motherhood, though the book kind of delves into that too. The busy life, the chore lists, the keeping the sort of family community going. Like, nuns have a ton of experience with that, actually. I thought that a lot of their advice when it came to sort of practical elements of fostering love and order and harmony in a small family-like community was actually extremely spot on. But I thought that they had a deep sort of well of advice to offer when it came to the spiritual aspects of motherhood in particular.
For sure, definitely. Of course, when you spend so much time in prayer a day, and a lot of these cloister communities, they're praying 6 to 9 times a day, depending
Mhm.
upon how they follow the monastic breviary.
Right.
So they're spending a lot of time in prayer. They have their mental prayer that they're participating and engaging in as well. And so there are those keen spiritual insights. So some of my favorite writings, so you mentioned Roswell, New Mexico. I love Mother Mary Frances,
Yeah,
who was their
wonderful.
mother abbess for many, many years. In my book, How They Love Mary, I did a little chapter on the Marian devotion of Mother Mary Frances. I actually went down to the monastery, celebrating Mass there at the convent. Yeah, just have you been down to Roswell? Have you been to the monastery? Have you visited the monasteries that you feature in the book?
So I was able to visit some of them. I'm in Western Pennsylvania, and I've got 5 little kids. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to get all the way out to Roswell. I got close. I was in New Mexico for a wedding, and I contacted the Roswell Port Clares, and I said, "I'm nearby. Can I come visit?" And I told them what town I was in, and they were like, "You're not nearby. The Southwest is a big place. Just because you're in the state limits does not mean you're nearby." So they were very excited for me to be in the state, but it turned out that I wasn't able to get all the way there. But we actually wrote letters back and forth to each other, and that's how we sort of communicated for the book. One day I'll get out there. I kind of consider them friends now, and I would love to go and see them and see Mother Mary Francis's resting place if that's possible. I know it's in the Cloister, but
it's in the Cloister.
you
I
kind of
was
take a
not
peek
able to
through
visit.
through a crack
You
or
could
something.
see it. You could see it from the parking lot is
There we
basically
go.
the closest you're going to get. So,
That's
um,
That's
but
close enough. I can do that.
yeah, very inspiring place. So, yeah. So how did you decide on the topics? You just mentioned you wrote letters back and forth. So obviously this book didn't come together overnight because
No.
there are some of these stories where like a videographer wanted to film Into Great Silence, this movie about Carthusians, and he wrote a letter to the monastery maybe 15 years previous to when he filmed, and then like 15 years later he gets a message back saying, "Do you still want to film?" So like, Cloister religious, they kind of go a little slower and whatnot. They discern. So I'm sure this was kind of a lengthy ordeal.
It was actually shorter than you'd think, though I will say that I started compiling the notes for the book right before my 4th kid was born, and I finished the book and turned in the manuscript shortly before my 5th kid was born, which might just explain how quickly I've been having kids, because the book took about 2 years from the initial sort of inquiries to turning it into my editor. But the nuns, I came up with a list. I kind of looked up a bunch of monasteries that I thought kind of fit, the vibe I was going for. I wanted monasteries that were very serious in their vocations, very serious in their charisms, but I also wanted monasteries that sort of showed the width and breadth of the monastic vocation, because if I'm asking the spiritual mothers for advice for the physical mothers, I wanted a plethora of perspectives, because not every, good Christian mom is the same, right? We all have different parenting styles. So I wanted the nuns' different monastic styles sort of reflected in that exchange as well. Because a great Cistercian could make a terrible Poor Clare. And so I wanted the Cistercians' insights as well as the Poor Clares, right? Different charisms call for different strengths, different weaknesses. And that's absolutely true when it comes to physical motherhood as well. So I compiled a big long list of all the monasteries that if I could get everyone I wanted involved, these are who I'd ask. Then I wrote them letters. Some I never got responses from. Maybe I'll get a response in 20 years and I can write the sequel. Some wrote me back right away and said, "This sounds awesome, but we are way too busy." Or, some of them, they just were like, "You know what? I just don't see it happening." But the ones that I got responses from, they actually responded fairly quickly and said, "This sounds fun. Let's do this." Or, and so one order said, "We don't think we can do it." And I said, "Okay, you can't write me back letters because that takes a long time. I get it. Can I just come to you? Because you're in the same state as I am, you're all other side of Pennsylvania, but I'll come to you with a tape recorder and I'll ask you questions and you just talk, and then I'll type it all out and write it all out." And they said, "Yeah, we can do that." So I went and visited them for a long afternoon and with a tape recorder and just asked a bunch of questions and then copied it out as best as I could.
Yeah. Well, that could make for a good podcast if you ever want to release the audio or something, and in collaboration with the nuns. Of course, I think being involved in a project like this spotlights their vocation, spotlights their monastery. Maybe, mothers who have daughters that they think could be religious, they might be drawn then. They're like, well, I want to be a nun, mom. And then mom says, well, I read this book and well, here are 5 monasteries. So it could be really good vocation recruitment too, what you're doing here as you're forming the domestic church. So
Right.
I guess too, I was wondering, did you ever consider a monastic vocation or before marriage?
No, I didn't. My parents definitely wanted all of us to. I'm one of 6 kids. My dad actually spent a number of years in the seminary before he discerned out, prior to the diaconate. And my mom actually spent a year in a convent before she discerned
Oh,
out, prior to any vows. Then they met each other, they got married, and all throughout growing up, they were always like, you know what, we want you guys to think about this. So actually, the Institute for Religious Life at Mundelein
sure.
Seminary, we went every year. I've talked to thousands of different nuns and monks and friars and religious about the religious vocation. I love the religious vocation, but I never felt it myself. I kind of knew that I wasn't called for that.
So you collect all this advice from a few different monasteries of nuns, from the Mother Abbess or Mother Superior. Uh, what's some of the more meaningful advice? Kind of, you've written the book, you've gone through it. Like, is there one piece of advice that just stands out and maybe you think about it often or recall it in your own life as a mom?
I do. I actually ask them a lot about prayer. Nuns have set hours of prayer, but they also try to fulfill the admonition to pray always. And I do not have set hours of prayer. And sometimes I wonder how in the world a lay mom could pray always. So I ask them a lot about prayer. One thing they told me is they're not experts in praying, they're experts in trying to pray, which I thought was really encouraging, that nuns can struggle with prayer too. It isn't just something that lay moms struggle with. I guess that's a no-brainer, but sometimes when you're in the thick of things and the kids aren't behaving during mass, you can think, everyone can pray except for me. So it's good to hear that others struggle and others have techniques to overcome the struggle. One of my favorite pieces of advice was a comment from one of the nuns. She said, it's great when you can, the monastic tradition, they recite the Psalms over and over and over again, right? And there's many good reasons why they do that. But she said, one of the great sort of benefits from that is you kind of get an earworm, right? That a snatch of a psalm will just keep running through your head
Mm,
randomly throughout the day. And she said, if you realize that you've got that earworm and you intend the earworm as a prayer, as opposed to say, oh, I got that stuck in my head again, that can be a form of prayer. Um, and that's kind of cool because I also get earworms. And so I've been trying to play, religious hymns around the kids more since getting that advice, and playing religious hymns for myself throughout the day. And I've noticed I've started getting those holy earworms, and then I can use them as prayer. Or the other day I was doing the dishes and I overheard my 3-year-old. He was humming a psalm. Most of the words were wrong, but he had bits and pieces and he had the tune sort of kind of correct. And I thought, oh wow, cool. He's got the holy earbug too.
mm.
And so he was praying in his own little way, and him praying in his own little way reminded me as I was doing the dishes to sort of add my intention to that. And it was a spontaneous prayer that we didn't even plan for. And it was right there.
Oh, wow. I really appreciate that because I've studied Thomas Merton, which I know kind of controversial figure. I only focus on his early writings when he was kind of not dabbling in Eastern mysticism. But I wrote a paper on his Mariology one time, and I focused on that kind of earworm, as you mentioned, because what he would often write about in his journals or in yeah, his different writings, he would reflect back about the antiphon of the day. And so
Mhm.
if it was a Marian feast day, like he would write the antiphon and just how that was recurring to him and how he kept thinking about that antiphon throughout the day. So it is there that in the monastic life, because they know the
Right.
Psalms, that they do kind of, it recurs, they recall it, they think about it, they meditate on it, night and day. So,
Right.
yeah, that is something that I've noticed in other monastic writings as well. So, one of the things you've done, again, collect all this advice. So, you mentioned, kind of the advice that one of the things that you took away, one thing that you think about often. Would you say there's advice in there that you're like, oh, that's good advice, but maybe it doesn't resonate with me? Or was there any kind of adverse reaction to some of the advice that was given?
Um, Adverse effect. I wouldn't say so. No, I think one of the great things about contemplative nuns, I'm sure there are exceptions that prove the rule, but they're such gentle and happy people that even when they give you advice that you don't necessarily want to hear, they say it in such a nice way that you just take it anyway. At least I do. Um, we talked about some topics that are fairly controversial for the world, but I think that they have such wisdom and such prudence and such humility, and their advice comes from them, right? Like what is working for them, what they have found when they embrace the sacrifices and the sorrows and the limitations, the sort of joy that they have found from it. So I think they temper some of their harder advice with, you know, with sort of this beautiful humility that it comes from the fact that they're following their own advice, right? So I asked one of the nuns, like, what happens when you just really need some time to yourself and you can't get it? And she said, well, maybe you don't need as much time to yourself as you think you do. Maybe start there. Make sure you actually have a need and it's not a pity party. And sometimes you don't want to hear that. Sometimes you're like, oh, but come on, I'm sure I, need a little bit of me time. But I think the beauty of vocation, and these nuns are all further on in the holiness aspect of their vocation than I am, I feel. The reality of vocation is that it should be, at the end of the day, you giving up more and more and more and more and allowing God more and more and more and more. And the world kind of doesn't like that. The world says, you need to have all this sort of protection around yourself, save your free time, save your you time, and the nuns, they don't, right? Or if they do it first, they're trying to find those places where they root out the spots where they've held back in their vocation. And that's beautiful to see. And you can see it all throughout their answers, these places where they are noticing an aspect of themselves that they haven't surrendered over to God, and they work. Maybe they haven't, it's not easy necessarily to give it up right away, but they work towards giving it up, right? Because the radical call of vocation is that we die to ourselves so that we can, fulfill what he has called us to do. And, lay mothers, lay fathers, everybody can benefit from that radical call to self-sacrifice. And there's moments where I find myself throughout the day not following the advice that I helped lay out in the book. And I think, darn it, here's another instance where God's calling me to give up something else, and
Sure.
and then to be more charitable about it and say, yes, I signed on to this. When I accepted my vocation, I need to see it through.
One of the things that I often preach about at a wedding, one of my recurring themes is kind of just seeing how the church mirrors that of the domestic church, right? So, like, as they form a family as husband and wife, that they come to church and they pray. And so they're going to pray in their own home. They come to
Mhm.
church and they participate in the sacrifice of the Holy Mass. And so, there's sacrifice that will be offered in their own families, that they come to church and they go to confession and they seek forgiveness. And so in the home, they're going to have to forgive. So, how do you see kind of the parallel between the cloister life with that of the family life? Like, how can the cloister mirror the home or the home mirror the cloister?
Right. Well, in several aspects, we can mirror each other. We have to mirror each other, right? Because, and we talked about this in the earlier parts of the book. we are all called to be part of God's family, right? In our vocations. And so the cloister is part of the family of the church, right? And it's, their own particular family under the mother abbess or the father abbot. And the other monks or nuns are the children in that monastic family. And same with, a lay family. And, so we are our own discrete families within the larger family of the church with, God as our father and Mary as our mother. I think one of the ways that mothers can model the cloister in our families is by modeling Our Lady. She is sort of the source of both of the vocations that women in the church have traditionally been called to. She's sort of the original a nun, right? With her perpetual virginity, contemplating God in her heart. That's a nun, right? And in her, in her case, sort of very much a contemplative nun, right? She's also the most perfect mother, right? She is the mother that all other mothers try to be or should try to be like, right? And so nuns try to model the family life of Our Lady. And that's one thing we kind of go into. I have little sections at the beginning of the book where I sort of showcase each monastery, and the family life of Nazareth is something that the nuns try to model in the cloister. And I think that one thing that lay mothers can do in modeling the cloister is sort of trying to draw closer to Mary's other aspects. So we try, it's obvious to lay mothers, right, that we should model Our Lady's motherhood. We should also try to model some aspects, the appropriate aspects for lay mothers, of her other, her her nun aspect, right? So she contemplates God in the silence of her heart. We are also called to do that as lay mothers, right? How do we do that? Well, the nuns suggested to me, you're up late with a screaming baby who doesn't realize it's bedtime, looking for Christ in the face of your child, right? In that moment. So finding God in what he has given you to deal with in that moment within the home, right? And trying to enter into the presence of God through what he has given you right then. So, I find that really amazing advice, because I don't have to be always going to the chapel to be in God's presence. I'm most truly in his presence in the chapel, right? And it's not like I can substitute the one for the other, but I can also enter into his presence while engaged in the calling of my vocation, which is what a nun strives to do in and out of the chapel. And that's what I should strive to do in the home, right? So looking for Christ in the face of my children, trying to model Our Lady in her contemplation throughout the home.
I'm curious, what does your husband do for work?
He's a writer.
Okay.
We're both
Well,
writers.
that's interesting. So you mentioned, obviously your book is dealing with nuns, right? And so, but in your answer there, you said, in the monastic life as mother abbesses and nuns, as abbots and monks or whatever, right? So it would be interesting now for him, and maybe you're doing this, but he should write a book of the same thing, like
Father to father.
father to father, and he should write, Clear Creek Monastery,
Here
or
we go.
maybe the Carthusians out in the west eastern part of the states, but just to identify some of these monastic communities and to get their counsel and their advice for fathers. Is that any consideration?
I don't know. I don't think he's thinking about that. He writes more politics stuff, but
Okay.
you're actually the second person to have mentioned that. So maybe I'll go and tell him.
Well, that's great. Yeah, no, it just seems like, and a lot of times you see this where like one book will come out and then like we would call this a brother book in this case, like the brother book of your sister, of its sister, could be a great concept. I guess
Yeah.
it'll depend how this book does, how it's
Yeah,
received,
there we
how it's
go.
promoted, all that, but that could lead to the sequel written by the second half of your family. So just to
That'd
see
be
what the
fun.
monastic wisdom for parents. So is this book, with that in mind, is this book intended for women? Could a husband read this book, or would they benefit
Absolutely,
from it?
absolutely. Several fathers have read this book. It's sort of speaking to women, it's geared towards women, but a lot of the issues in there are issues of family life. So I think fathers could definitely benefit from the issues of family life. Maybe they could benefit from sort of a reading about, the sort of things that women, that mothers think about, right? If they want to get into their wife's head a little bit. I mean, I supposedly it's a common complaint that men never know what women are thinking about. Well, when it comes to the vocation of motherhood, maybe that there'd be some insight, hopefully some insight there. Um, Definitely, my husband spends plenty of time at the back of church with the noisy toddler. So I think that elements in the book on prayer would be particularly useful for fathers of small children who are also wondering if they will ever get their prayer life back.
Mm.
I think that could be beneficial to men as well. Yeah.
You conclude the book by referencing two spiritual mother saints for mothers. Who are
Mhm.
those spiritual mothers?
Yes. So one sort of complaint that I've heard, other women give is that, there's so many saints out there. There's so many wonderful saints out there. We wish there were more lay mother saints because we would like some saintly examples of from lay mothers. And, we have several, right? We have several really cool ones. But I thought, you know what? Actually, some of my favorite saint friends are nuns. Um, and, along with the concept of the book, right? Nuns have a lot to offer moms. So saints who are nuns also have a lot to offer us as moms. And I gravitate towards them for some reason. I think it's because maybe there's just so much about their lives that we do know, right? Because their monastic communities made sure to keep it recorded so that we remember them because they were such amazing spiritual mothers. So I picked an old saint and a new saint, who
Oh,
are spiritual mothers that I think really showcase motherhood. So the first one is Saint Hilda Whitby. She was early English saint. She helped oversee the Synod of Whitby. So she was a mother abbess. They don't do this like this anymore, but there used to be monasteries where there was a man's monastery here and a woman's monastery here, and normally like a river that separated them, but their administrative structure could be kind of linked. And she was actually the abbess in charge of both of them, which must have been so much work. But they wrote about her, the Venerable Bede, who wrote a lot of
mm.
early English history. He said that all who knew her called her mother. Um,
Oh,
and popes would write asking for advice, kings would write asking for advice, but she also sort of nurtured the vocation of the first English poet whose name was Cadman, and he was a sheep herder. And so she had time for popes and kings. She also had time for sheep herders, right? She's this amazing woman who really models motherhood. And I thought she would be a great example, and also someone that no one really knows about, right? She's not really one of
yeah.
the saints that's plastered all over churches these days, but she
You
really is.
easily could have done St. Clair, right? But this one
Yes.
is better.
Yes. Well, I felt everyone knows St. Clair, right?
Hmm.
But St. Hilda, nobody knows. And I think she's a beautiful saint for mothers. The other saint I picked is a saint that is really close to my heart. I actually have a relic of hers that I found in a book. So I felt like she sent it to me. Her
Oh,
name is Saint Mother Miravallis de Jesus. She was canonized by Pope John Paul II. She died in the 70s. She's a Spanish saint, a Carmelite, and she was almost killed during the Spanish Civil War by the communists, because they were, they would just one night show up at a monastery and just shoot everybody. Well, they showed up at her monastery, ripped the place down, loaded all the nuns into a bus, and then the bus driver just dropped them off at an apartment building and said, "Get out." instead of shooting them. And she went on to found somewhere in the neighborhood of like 25 Carmels throughout Spain. As soon as one got built and dedicated, she would leave with 3 others and found a new one, because there were just so many young women who wanted to join her monastery. And she wanted to follow St. Teresa of Avila's requirements that Discalced Carmelites should have small family-like Carmels. So when it got too big, she'd say, okay, gotta have another one. And she would always go and found the next one. And she's this amazing saint. Her name literally means the marvels of Jesus, like the miracles of Jesus. And I feel like she's very much a miracle of Jesus. You read her life story and you're like, this reads like one of those old saints that's like walking on water and doing all these crazy things you don't see these days. But she's a modern saint, 20th century. And nobody knows about her either. And I picked her because she's also this amazing spiritual mother that really has a lot to offer mothers everywhere, nuns in the convent and Christian mothers of children. Her miracle that got her canonized was actually a little boy fell into his family swimming pool and drowned and was considered completely dead, did not breathe for almost 2 days. And the doctors were like, we need to send this body to the morgue. He's dead. And his mother was like, no, I'm going to pray to Mother Miravalis. And he was raised from the dead with no brain injury at all. Someone who hasn't breathed in 2 days doesn't come back to life. Someone who hasn't breathed in, just a matter of minutes has traumatic brain injuries. This boy was fine. He was totally fine. She raised him from the dead. And I loved that the miracle that got her canonized was in response to a mother about a child. So she shows up in the book too.
That's incredible. So these two spiritual mothers can be intercessors, can be examples. So like how do you incorporate that devotion, in your own personal life then? So, the two, Saint Hilda and Saint Maravalis, like how do you foster a devotion then?
Actually, the way I foster devotion to them is if you think about the way you call up a friend on the phone and talk to them. When I'm doing dishes, the way I pray to them is just sort of like hey, you know what, I was thinking this. What do you think? ... Hey, I'm struggling with this. Can you help me? Can you talk to Jesus about this for me? So it's like my internal phone call with them is kind of how I think of it. It's when I would otherwise just be spacing out the window or driving down the road, not thinking about anything. I have a phone call with those two saints.
Well, that's great. And I'm sure there are many other holy intercessors too, but
Yes.
those two that you mentioned. And yeah, I have something similar. I have a great devotion to this Father Willie Doyle, servant of God. And I hope he'll become blessed. I hope he'll become a saint. But I often find myself thinking about him, or I will call upon his intercession. Especially for impossible things too, trying to get him that miracle. So, yeah, I'm always curious how devotion kind of manifests itself in the life of different believers and Catholics. So,
Yeah.
well, that's wonderful. So, Mother to Mother, Spiritual and Practical Wisdom from the Cloister to the Home. It's available now from Tan Books. It's a beautiful book, hardcover, and it has a dust jacket, everything like that. But in it, you're going to encounter different topics. You're going to get the wisdom of some mother abbesses of monasteries today. You're going to be led into prayer for your family and for your home. So anything else you want to add about the book? Any place you want to direct people to besides Tan Books?
Actually, I believe you can buy it on Amazon, and actually someone sent me a link to Target and Walmart. Apparently it's there too. So so it's in a lot of bookstores. Barnes and Noble apparently is carrying it. I want to go to my local Barnes and Noble and see if I can see it on the shelves, because that'd be kind of trippy.
Yeah, so my experience in publishing is like I do remember finding my book, one of my books on the shelves at Barnes and Noble. Sometimes it depends upon like the distribution or the number of sales, like if they'll acquire it, and Yeah, but it can't hurt to put in a bug for them. And,
Right.
if you go there, you don't see it, you should let them know. And hopefully
Exactly.
they'll carry it.
Right. And I hear a lot of Catholic bookstores either have it on their shelves, or if they don't have it on their shelf, they have a way to get it as well. If people don't want to order it over the internet, if they want to order it
Yeah.
through a bookstore, there are a lot of bookstores that'll order it for them and have it in stock if they ask.
Yeah. Well, and that person asking will probably force them to order a few books. And
There
so
we go.
even more people will discover. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cuff, for joining me today, for sharing I guess I almost said saintly wisdom, the motherly wisdom you learned from Consecrated Religious. It's definitely a book for moms out there, but as we learned also in the conversation, for dads as well. So thanks so much, Dr. Cuff.
Thank you, Father.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FREdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.